Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting into some buy low targets heading into week 3 of the fantasy football season. And for a lot of you guys, this is some of your favorite content to check out. So I've got 5 players that you can be buying. We've got 3 running backs, 2 wide receivers. We'll talk about each of these guys. For a lot of these guys, it's very tough to talk about the positives and a lot less about the negatives because a lot of these guys are outside the top 20, top 30 at their position. I even have the wide receiver 75 as a buy low, so definitely an opportunity to buy really low on this guy. If you guys do enjoy this content, let me know by hitting the like button and hitting that subscribe button to be sure that I can get more of this to you each and every week. Plan to get in some sell highs, some guys to give up on throughout the weeks. We'll be posting this style of content every Tuesday, so pay attention to that. Let's get into our first player here. All right, first up is Javante Williams of the Denver Broncos. He's currently the running back 33 in fantasy points per game through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, Javante Williams, a player coming off of the torn ACL, and honestly, the usage I'm pretty encouraged by. P. Ryan has outsnapped Williams through the first 2 weeks, very slightly, 62 to 59, but that's because he has a pretty significant advantage in the receiving game, something I did expect coming into the season, a 42 to 23 advantage in routes run for P. Ryan. But Williams actually has the advantage in targets, 8 to 7, and 2 of them are second and third targets. The 2 of them are the second and third in targets for Denver. So the running backs are plenty involved in this offense. In the receiving game, Williams is on pace for 68 targets on the season. That is very encouraging and a nice little kick to his fantasy finish. One that even with P. Ryan splitting those opportunities, he's still pacing for a pretty sizable number here and could potentially get into that 40 reception range for the duration of the season, which would be great for him in terms of boosting his fantasy finish in those PPR and half PPR formats. What I do like, though, he's getting the vast majority of the rushing opportunities. Last week in particular, Samaje Perine didn't get a single rushing opportunity until the fourth quarter when he was on the field a little bit more when this team was trailing. A 12 to 1 advantage Williams had last week, and he received the team's only inside the 5 attempts. So I do think Williams will be the guy when it comes to converting touchdown opportunities for this offense. And obviously the first 2 weeks of the season, 2 losses for this team, and they haven't been running the ball quite as often as I would have expected, but that comes with the territory of losing the first 2 games. They've been running the ball in only 37.5% of plays, which is 25th in the NFL. So I do expect that to increase significantly and get closer to, I would expect this team to be running the ball in probably more like 45% of plays, maybe in the 42% area. So some more volume could be coming his way. And when it does, that could certainly benefit him. And for Williams being this involved this early into tearing his ACL, I think that's a good sign here. And the opportunities can only grow as the season progresses. And if he continues to be this involved as a receiver, definitely someone you can buy low on because the first 2 weeks have been pretty poor if you drafted this guy. So there could be some people in your league that are ready to give up on him. Next up, we'll be running through all of our running backs here. I've got Joe Mixon, and there's a lot to love actually about Joe Mixon, despite the fact he is the RB20 through the first 2 weeks of the season, but on the field a ton. This is the thing I loved about Mixon heading into the season. It hasn't come together yet, but if you're patient and you have him, you'll be ready to see this happen. And if you do not have him, an excellent chance to trade for him before things get a lot better. He's been on the field for 77.3% of snaps, a really high volume, and his route participation is also solid, 53.2% route participation. But more importantly, the opportunity between him and the other backs, it's pretty much vast majority going to Mixon, even in the receiving game. He's run 70.7% of the routes run by running backs in this offense. So when a running back is out there running a route, it's pretty much Mixon all the time. Chase Brown has only played 1 snap. That was in week 2. In week 1, he wasn't healthy and active. So he's a guy the team drafted that isn't getting involved. It's looking like Trevion Williams will be the guy taking some of the pass blocking and receiving work. He's a guy talent-wise that I do not think will take over for Mixon in a heavy facet when it comes to the receiving game. He's a quality pass blocker, which will help get him some snaps and get him on the field like we've seen the first 2 weeks, but he's not taking away many opportunities when it comes to production from a fantasy perspective. And Mixon, despite the Bengals' struggles through the first 2 weeks, is averaging 17.5 touches per game, so good volume there. His 1.29 yards per route run actually leads the team. That includes T. Higgins, includes Jamar Chase, and he's been more efficient, which I did say was an opportunity for him with the improvements on the offensive line. He's averaging 4.4 yards per carry, which is actually the best number he's had since the 2018 season for him, and 3.31 yards after contact per attempt, which is top 12 of the position. That is not something we've seen from Joe Mixon very often in his career. And if we continue to see that, this offense improves, we're going to see Mixon be much more fantasy relevant and be a top 12 guy. The Rams and the Cardinals are up in 2 of the next 3 weeks. That is going to help this offense get back on track, give Mixon some positive game scripts to run in, which he has not had so far to start the season. Really like Mixon as a guy that the numbers and the usage is fantastic. We just need this offense to be better, and I am very confident that that can happen. Definitely someone you want to take a chance and see what your league mates might be willing to do to give him up. Our third and final running back, the Minnesota Vikings, Alexander Madison. He's currently the RB 30 in fantasy points per game through the first 2 weeks, so definitely someone that has been a major disappointment considering where you drafted him. But I think you got to pay attention to the matchups. And the two matchups to start the year were tough. Tampa Bay last week, or in week 1, 7th in fantasy points allowed to running backs last season. This is still a quality run defense, so I got no problem with Madison having a down week there. Last week, the Eagles. The Eagles look insanely better against the run compared to last season with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in the middle of that defense. So again, I'm going to cut Madison a break in that matchup as well. But now we look at the next 4 weeks and things suddenly look a lot better for going forward for Madison and his production. The Chargers next week. The Chargers are a brutal run defense. The Panthers the following, the Chiefs, and the Bears. These don't necessarily mean positive game scripts with the Chargers potentially and the Chiefs, but these are teams that are not anywhere near as good against the run as the two teams this team has faced in the opening 2 weeks of the season. And as well, I take the matchups and then I have to go ahead and look at the opportunity and the share and the workload for Madison. And it's all really solid. Like on the field for 74.5% of snaps, that's an elite usage. We look at the backup Ty Chandler. He's only been on the field for 14.8% of snaps. That's not even RB2 territory. Like that's an RB3, not even really change of pace guy. He's barely getting on the field, Ty Chandler. He's had like 4 rushing attempts for I think 0 yards. So it's not like we're seeing Ty Chandler come in and be more efficient with his carries and opportunities. And then for Madison, 9 targets on the season. That ranks 7th amongst running backs, 57% route participation, even better than the number we talked about with Joe Mixon. So he's out there. He's on the field a ton. We know this offense can score points and move the ball. And when they get in the red zone or they get inside the 10 and goal-to-go situations, they'll give Madison the ball. There's no one else here that's going to take those opportunities away from Madison. He's already scored a touchdown on the season as well. I definitely think there's a lot to like here with Madison. And despite his struggles, and you look at his efficiency and you're saying, wow, this guy hasn't been very good. No one's taken these opportunities away from him. And the matchups are going to get easier than those opening 2 to start the season. An absolute must-buy guy because I do think a lot of people will start to see him as a player that can't be in that RB2 range when I see him as a very safe RB2 heading into the rest of the season. So definitely go buy him. Okay, I mentioned that wide receiver 75 earlier. It's Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders. Been a tough first couple of weeks for one of my favorite players in the pre-draft or the preseason and throughout the draft season. But I have a lot of reasons to be encouraged for what we've seen through the first 2 weeks and how it can get better. So what we'll start with, he does lead the team in targets. He's been the most targeted wide receiver on this Commanders team, 11 targets on the season. That's more than any other guy in this offense. So what's different from last season where he was able to create explosive plays and score a lot of touchdowns when he was on the field? Well, his ADOT is down considerably. So his ADOT last season, his average up at the target was 15.4 yards. This season, it's 9.3 yards. So that's come down. Now, he's also doing that because he's running a lot more of his routes from the slot, which we didn't see last season. This season, he's running 55% of his routes from the slot. So the majority of his routes are coming from the slot, whereas last year, he ran just 26.3% of his routes from the slot. So being in the slot and being out wide, you're likely to see a little bit lower of an average depth of target, especially in this offense coached by Eric Bieniemy, the play caller. Now, I think him running routes from the slot is actually a very positive sign. We've seen it in the targets. We haven't seen it in the production, but the slot wide receiver in Eric Bieniemy's offense and the Chiefs offense the last 2 seasons, they targeted the slot 46.1 at a 46.1% rate. That is a number that is an over 10% increase in comparison to what it was last season for Washington under the former play caller. So I do think that they're utilizing Dotson as the number 1 receiver in this offense because the good news is Dotson has been on the field and his route participation is pretty much at an elite level. 93% route participation on the season, the highest on the team by more than 10% than compared to the next guy, which I believe is Terry McLaurin. The concern is for me, and what I think will change, is they are just spreading the ball around way too much. 11 targets start the year, which leads the team, but it's only a 15.7% target share in this offense. 10 players have registered a reception for this team. 3 different tight ends. Cole Turner, we saw Logan Thomas, who got hurt, registering. I think he's got 10 targets on the year as well. And then they also had John Bates. So if this team starts to kind of figure out and hone in on their best offensive weapons, which I believe they think Dotson is, we're going to see that target share increase, even though, again, like I said, he has the highest target share on the team. We just need to see this team looking to focus more on a few guys as opposed to sharing the ball to a ton. I think that will happen. I think Dotson is the most talented player in this offense. They're utilizing him like a number 1 option, and eventually that is going to start coming together for a Commanders team that's been throwing the ball a ton through the first 2 weeks, and a team that I do think will be in a lot of game scripts where they will need to throw the football. I like Dotson to be the beneficiary. We saw him be a standout red zone target for this team last season. I think that can continue into this season. He can continue to find the end zone and be a guy that really dominates in terms of being a player that potentially gets to that 100+ targets on the season and gives you a great fantasy finish this year. So I definitely want to buy him as a guy that really everyone is looking at that's really, really struggled to start the year, but the underlying numbers look a lot better. Our last player, it's Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. He's currently the wide receiver 37 in fantasy points per game through the first 2 weeks of the year. But what I love is basically every single underlying number looks great for Mike Williams. He's top 12 in targets with 17, so top 12 at the position. He's also 11th in receptions with 12, so excellent there as well. He's also 5th in deep targets. So the volume is good, and as well, the volume is good with the targets, the volume's still good with the receptions, and he's getting these deep targets as well. He's 5th in deep targets with 4 deep targets through the first 2 games of the year, but he's only made 1 reception in those 4 deep targets. Now, I've watched a lot of the Chargers through the first 2 weeks. These receptions aren't coming in based off of, quite frankly, like some off throws from Justin Herbert that aren't on target, some balls that are ending up out of bounds and aren't even really catchable for Williams, but he's still consistently getting those looks. Keenan Allen has converted on 3 deep targets into 2 receptions and 78 yards. Allen's been the one that's cashed in on his opportunities and his looks. Williams hasn't quite yet, but the volume is still there. A 24.6% target share, which is excellent, despite missing about 10-15 snaps in week 1 when he left the game with a potential concussion. He was evaluated there, came back in. The volume and opportunity and share of this offense are still really solid. And we talked about this in the preseason, and it's come together through the first 2 weeks. The ball is being pushed downfield significantly more compared to last season, and Herbert is making more plays downfield compared to last season. He ranks 7th in average depth of target at 9.4 yards to start the season, where last year he was 37th, 4th last among quarterbacks at just 6.9 yards of average depth of target. So we're looking at plays more downfield, more into like intermediate 10 plus yards downfield plays for Mike Williams to make, less of the check down work we're seeing. And this team is also pushing the ball downfield in that they have the 3rd most deep targets to start the year. So they're pushing the ball downfield at a high volume, and it's also a significant share. It's not just the teams passing the ball a ton, so they're seeing more deep targets. Almost 15% of Herbert's passes have been passes of 20 plus yards, which is also 3rd in the NFL. So Williams is a prime guy to be able to make plays downfield. We haven't seen it come together quite yet. I'm very confident it will, and the volume is really solid. Like, this is a guy who's seen, like I said, 17 targets to start the year. He's easily going to be right now on pace to be a guy that's going to be top 12 at targets if he is, and he's a guy that can make great plays downfield in offense that's attempting a lot of deep passes. This can really come together for Williams, and with Williams' size, he's definitely a great end zone target for this offense as well. He's wide receiver 37, so he hasn't been absolutely terrible, but he's not one of those guys that you're happy with his performance so far. So whoever does have him in your league might be willing to let him go, and I think Williams can produce for sure wide receiver 2 and maybe even be a back-end wide receiver 1 by the time the season's over, based on what we're seeing so far this year. All right, those are 5 of my favorite buy low targets to start the 2023 fantasy football season. If you're heading into week 3, some of these guys have some great matchups coming up, so make sure you get on these players right away here this week and try to make some trades for them. If you guys did enjoy today's video, would really appreciate it if you did hit that subscribe button for me. Lets me know that you enjoy this content and you do want to continue seeing it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.